our next storyteller, he sent me all this stuff about him, but I'm just going to go with the title because that's enough for me. It's Don Fogleman, and the title of his story is I'm Huge in Prague, How I Became a Cult Figure in Europe's City of Spiders. Don Fogleman, everyone.
I learned to drive, or learned to read when I was about 6 years old, like everybody. But unlike most normal people, once I started, I never stopped. So I read really fast, and I never let more than a few hours go by before starting another book after I finish one. So I've averaged about a book a day for most of my life. I've read about 10,000 books. And at some point in my life, I started just buying my favorites in first edition hardback. And within a few years, I had books stacked all over the house. And my wife, literally in every room, my wife told me, she's got to go. So I opened a bookstore. Actually, there's a whole story about how I opened the bookstore, which is very entertaining, but we don't have time for that crap. So I opened this bookstore, and within a few months, I also started writing a column for a local newspaper called The Bookman, and the name of the shop was Bookman's Used Books. So actually, more people knew me as the Bookman than knew me as Don Fogleman. And there were a couple of high school kids who used to come in and hang out at the bookstore after they got off school and stuff. And they were smart, they were funny, and they were pretty well read for their age. So we talked about all kinds of crap for a long time, like for that entire year. And they graduated at the end of the year, and their names were Brandon and Chris. And Chris won a fellowship or a scholarship or some kind of ship to study in Prague. So he moves over there, and he lives in the dorm with the other students and everything. And while he was hanging out at the store, once I got to know them better and they got a little older and stuff, I started telling them stories from my youth, my misspent youth. Mostly it took place in the 80s when I was hanging out with this guy named Bob. Now Bob still lives here in town, so I don't want to use his last name. I definitely don't want to have Bob angry at me. So I figured I'd tell you a couple of those stories that I told about Bob to these guys, and we'll get back to the main subject matter after that. But Bob was dating this one girl, and she was resisting his charms, to be honest with you. So he'd been dating her for a couple of weeks, and he was really, really determined to get her into the sack. So anyway, they're on the couch at her place, and they're making out. And he's doing that United Nations thing, you know, with the Roman hands. And blood. He's like, oh baby, oh, you're so sexy and beautiful. Oh my God, your pussy's so tight. It's like fingering a 12-year-old. So she hears back. You fingered a 12-year-old pussy? I'm at 14. Come on, it's a joke. Another time he's out with this woman who was married to a friend of ours, and he traveled a lot. He was not home during that time, so at the end of the night, after they'd been drinking for about 4 hours, they ended up back at her place. And somehow they ended up in the bedroom, and he discovers that she has a kinky side because there are Velcro straps attached to each of the 4 corners of the bed. Yeah, baby. Well, Bob thought that was cool, you know. And so, like I said, they've been drinking. So he gets her undressed, and he lays her out on the bed, and he straps her down there really tight and everything, and she's all laid out, spread eagle, and helpless, and vulnerable. His to do with what he will. It's an intoxicating sight. In fact, Bob's head is spinning. So he crawls up on that bed, and he nestles up against her, and works his lips into a little hollow in her throat, and he passes dead out for 8 solid hours. Now, at one point, about mid-80s, Bob and I go to Key West. And we talked about going to Key West, but we never made any firm plans or anything. I told my wife we were talking about it, but we didn't, like I said, we hadn't made any plans or anything. One day, he shows up at my door, and his van's running up the curb, and he's got OP shorts on, he's got some Ray-Bans on, he's got a wife beater on. He's like, I'm going to Key West, tell him. You know, I couldn't turn that down. So I rushed in and I called my wife at work. She's away from her desk. So I'm like, arr. So I run into the bedroom and I start packing a bag and everything. I get everything packed, it only takes me a few minutes. I run back in and I grab that phone again and I try to call my wife again. She's still not at her desk. So I leave her a note. Let me give you a little tip. If you're a husband, don't ever leave your note that says, your wife a note that says, I've gone to Key West with Bob. It's been 30 years. She hasn't forgotten it. And I don't really think it's fair because I did call her later. It was 10 days later. I called so she could send us some money. So but I did call her. While we were down there in Key West, we went to our first gay bar. It's called the Copa, if I remember correctly, and it was 3 floors. It was very impressive. And unknown to me, we kind of got separated at one point, and unknown to me, Bob is dickering with these 2 gay Marines who had a local girl with him. And his deal was he would trade me for this local girl. And they were on board. They thought that was a great idea. I was a lot better looking back then. So they made the deal basically, and I guess these guys came over and tried to approach me, but I was, you know, I'm straight and I'm stupid, so I had no idea what was happening. You know? So they go back over to Bob, who luckily was still there, and they says, your friend, he doesn't seem terribly into this. And he says, that's just the way Don is. He says, here's the thing about Don. He says, Don loves the dick. He's still kind of in the closet, so he doesn't like to admit it. He says, what Don likes, he likes to be tied up. And he's going to pretend he doesn't like it at first. It took me a while to see the humor in that. Because that could have turned out badly for everybody. And I've always thought it was really stupid that he would say, oh, he's not going to pretend he doesn't like it first. Like 15 minutes into it, I'm going, you know? This anal rape thing is not that bad. So yeah, I told these stories and I don't know, dozens of others to these kids, and like I said, they graduated that year, and Chris won some kind of ship to go over to Prague and study for a year. So while he's over there, he's telling these stories to all these other students, and most of them spoke English and stuff, so that wasn't a problem or anything. But they wanted to hear more, you know, they wanted to know more about this bookman guy. That's another thing. See, Chris didn't want to bring Bob into it. He didn't want to explain who Bob was and everything. So any point of the story, whoever did the story was always the bookman. All these stories were by me. So he tells all these stories, and they want to hear more and stuff. They're like asking him, well, has the bookman written any books that we can read more stories? Oh, no, he hasn't done that. Well, does he tour? Does he lecture? No, he doesn't. Well, does he have a website? No, he doesn't have a website. I've never been over to. So So they kind of took it upon themselves to be fans, and Chris told me that some of them actually made their own T-shirts with like a punchline from one of the stories on the front, and then their bookman on the back, like I'm at 14, and then the bookman on the back. And so that's kind of how I became. The stories were told and retold to their friends and things like that. And so for a few short months at the turn of the century, in a major European capital, I attained pop culture icon status. Now that should probably be the end of the story. But a couple of months later, I'm standing in line at the grocery store, or actually I'm at the register at the grocery store, and there's this kid waiting on, hitting the register. He's maybe 20 years old, and he's got a beautiful head of hair on him, beautiful white teeth, and he's got flawless skin, built pretty nice. And he decides he's going to have a conversation with me. He says, hey, see them two down there? And he's indicating the end of the line. So I look down there, and there's a couple of women down there, maybe late 30s, early 40s, MILFs, okay? And they're whispering and chuckling and giggling and stuff, waving at him and things like that. And I look at him, and he says, that's my fan club. He says, anytime I'm working, they always come to my line. I looked at the ladies again, and I looked at them again. You think that's something? I am huge in Prague.